Have you noticed that the closer 2026 gets, the stronger the urge becomes to step away from noise, from people, opinions, and even social media? As if something inside you were asking for silence, space, and solitude. Not out of sadness, but out of necessity. And what if I told you this isn't weakness, social failure, or depression, but a deep calling? A collective movement linked to the Hermit archetype and to the number 9 year in numerology, which is pushing millions of people inward, forcing them to confront truths that were previously muffled by excess information, stimuli, and distractions. This calling doesn't arrive with clear warnings. It shows up as fatigue, as disinterest in the superficial, as a sense that something needs to change, even if you don't yet know exactly what. And it's precisely this lack of a logical explanation that makes so many people feel confused, displaced, or even guilty for wanting to withdraw. Now tell me, have you become more selective, more introspective, more tired of empty conversations? Do you feel the need to step away in order to find yourself again, but don't quite understand why? In this video, you'll understand why 2026 is activating the awakening of intuition, why isolation can be a sign of spiritual alignment, not a problem, and how to use this period to clear patterns, decisions, and relationships that no longer serve you. If you stay until the end, you'll understand exactly what this call to be alone is trying to teach you, and how to move through this year with clarity, purpose, and direction, instead of confusion and guilt. The goal here is not to romanticize loneliness, but to reveal the hidden meaning behind it so you can stop fighting yourself and start using this moment as a true portal of transformation. To understand why 2026 seems to be pushing so many people towards solitude, we need to look beyond surface behavior and observe the deeper movement taking place. In numerology, year 9 represents closure, completion, and release. It doesn't speak of immediate beginnings, but of inevitable endings, and endings almost always require silence. There is no real closure amid noise, constant distraction, and external validation. When a cycle is closing, life naturally reduces stimuli, distances people, dismantles routines, and creates forced pauses, not as punishment, but as preparation. The problem is that we were conditioned to believe that being constantly busy, connected, and socially active is a sign of success and emotional health. So when this rhythm begins to fail, the first reaction is to assume that something is wrong. The Hermit archetype emerges precisely at this point of rupture. It represents one who withdraws in order to see more clearly, not because they reject the world, but because they realize that continuing to look outward prevents them from seeing what is within. The Hermit carries a lantern, a symbol of consciousness, inner wisdom, and refined intuition. In 2026, this energy intensifies collectively. People who once tolerated crowded environments, constant conversation, and excessive stimulation begin to feel drained. This is not arrogance or emotional coldness. It is heightened sensitivity. When consciousness expands, what once seemed normal begins to feel heavy, and withdrawal arises as a natural response to this excess. There is also a deep psychological factor at play in this process. For years, many people kept themselves busy in order not to hear their own inner voice. Overwork, social media, empty relationships, and constant entertainment functioned as emotional anesthetics. The year of the Hermit removes this anesthetic. Suddenly, silence appears, and with it, questions that were postponed for a long time. Am I on the right path? Does this life still make sense to me? What do I really want without the influence of others? These questions don't arise when we are distracted. They arise when we are alone. And that is exactly why solitude frightens so many people. It reveals. If, as you listen to this, you realize that this need to withdraw has also been growing inside you, leave a like now and comment below whether this movement started recently or if you've been feeling it for a longer time. In addition to supporting the channel, this creates a space for exchange among people who are going through the same process. Another essential point is understanding that this forcing does not come from outside. It's not the world deciding that you must be alone. It is your own psyche, your intuition, and your consciousness asking for space to reorganize everything that has become messy over the years. In previous cycles, you may have stayed in relationships out of fear of loneliness, accepted situations out of insecurity, or followed paths simply because they were expected of you. Year 9 no longer sustains this. It breaks fragile structures, dismantles false identities, and exposes internal inconsistencies. And the more someone resists this process, the more uncomfortable it becomes. That's why so many people report the same sensations: the desire to cancel plans, respond to fewer messages, spend more time alone, observe more, and speak less. This is not disinterest in the world, it is reconnection with oneself. The hermit does not abandon everything, he selects. He understands that energy is a limited resource and begins to invest it only where there is meaning. In 2026, this selection becomes inevitable. People who don't respect your boundaries begin to drift away naturally. Environments that no longer resonate become unbearable. And although this may generate guilt at first, over time a sense of relief emerges that is hard to explain. This chapter is fundamental because it changes the central question. Instead of, "Why am I withdrawing?" the question becomes, "What am I withdrawing from?" And this shift in perspective is liberating. You begin to realize that you are not losing something. You are freeing yourself from excess. You are closing a cycle of constantly adapting to others' expectations. You are finally creating space to hear your own intuition, something that is only possible when the noise decreases. 2026 does not demand that you completely isolate yourself from the world, but it does demand honesty with yourself. It reveals where you force yourself, where you diminish yourself, and where you live on autopilot. Withdrawal is merely the visible symptom of a much deeper process, the reorganization of identity. And once this begins, there is no pretending that nothing is happening. The hermit appears to remind you that all great clarity is born in silence, and that every new direction begins with a conscious pause. One of the greatest conflicts experienced by those moving through the year of the hermit is the confusion between conscious isolation and depression. This happens because we were educated within a logic that associates well-being with constant stimulation, people, and activity. If you withdraw, something must be wrong. If you prefer to be alone, you must justify yourself. If you reduce contact, labels quickly appear. But 2026 exposes an uncomfortable truth. Not all withdrawal is illness, and not all silence is emptiness. Often, silence is exactly what allows something within you to function properly again. Depression, at its core, is accompanied by loss of meaning, deep apathy, lack of vital energy, and internal disconnection. The hermit's isolation is the opposite of this. It is filled with lucidity, observation, questioning, and above all, heightened sensitivity. The person withdraws not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much. They perceive inconsistencies, excesses, and aware that they once ignored. Withdrawal arises as a natural attempt to reorganize the inner world. It is like turning off devices that have been running too long, consuming energy unnecessarily. In 2026, many people experience a kind of existential fatigue. It's not constant sadness, but saturation. Saturation of opinions, news, conflicts that go nowhere, relationships based solely on superficial exchange. This fatigue is not a sign of emotional weakness. It is a sign of maturity. The psyche begins to reject what does not nourish it. And when this happens, the body and mind ask for pause. They ask for retreat, They ask for less stimulus and more meaning. Calling this depression ignores the broader context of this movement entirely. The Hermit archetype teaches that before any real progress, recalibration is necessary. Think of a delicate instrument. If it is exposed to constant noise, excessive vibration, and continuous use, it loses its tuning. The only way to tune it again is to remove it from the noise. The same happens with intuition. For years, many people made decisions based solely on external expectations. What others think, what society expects, what generates quick approval. Intuition was set aside. In 2026, this imbalance demands correction. Isolation emerges as a process of inner tuning. It is at this point that contradictory feelings arise. On one hand, relief at finally being able to be silent. On the other, guilt for not meeting others' expectations. Many people find themselves thinking, I should be more present, I should go out more, I should reply to everyone. But this should rarely comes from the soul. It comes from conditioning. The year of the Hermit directly confronts this kind of inner pressure because it shows, in practice, that continuing to force yourself only leads to further exhaustion. Recalibration requires honesty, recognizing limits, respecting your own rhythm, and accepting that not all phases of life are expansive. Another clear sign that this isolation is not depression lies in the quality of time spent alone. In depression, time feels heavy, dragging, suffocating. In conscious isolation, time gains density. The person begins to reflect more, perceive patterns, and understand past choices. There is discomfort, yes, but it is a revealing discomfort. It is like cleaning a wound. It hurts, but it is necessary for healing. In 2026, many are forced to look at aspects of their lives they had been avoiding, relationships that have already ended emotionally, jobs that no longer make sense, identities built solely to please others. Silence brings all of this into view. There is also a clear shift in how energy is distributed. People undergoing internal recalibration become more selective. They can no longer fake interest or sustain social masks for long. This does not mean arrogance or coldness. It means alignment. When you truly begin to listen to yourself, it becomes impossible to ignore what drains your energy. And this perception, while liberating, initially isolates you, because not everyone moves at the same level of awareness. The Hermit walks alone precisely because he sees farther and cannot always explain what he sees. It is important to emphasize, recalibration is not permanence. The Hermit does not isolate himself forever. He withdraws to understand, adjust, and then return to the world with greater clarity. The problem is that many people try to skip this stage. They want to return to action without understanding what needs to change. 2026 does not allow shortcuts. It demands real pause, honest reflection, and the courage to admit that certain paths must end before new ones can begin. Resisting this creates anxiety. Accepting it brings clarity. When you understand that this isolation is functional, something shifts internally. Guilt begins to fade. The fear of falling behind loses strength. You realize you are not stagnant. You are reorganizing. You are clearing internal noise so intuition can be heard again. And this is one of the greatest promises of the Year of the Hermit, to return to people the ability to trust their own perception once more. Something that only happens when external noise stops dictating decisions. This chapter exists to resolve one of the biggest problems of this period, self-judgment. When you understand that you are going through recalibration rather than collapse, you stop fighting the process and begin to cooperate with it. And that completely changes the experience of 2026. Isolation ceases to be a burden and becomes a tool, a sacred space of inner reorganization that prepares the ground for more conscious choices in the next cycle. When the noise diminishes, something curious happens. The mind, which was always busy reacting, finally begins to observe. This is one of the deepest and least understood aspects of the Year of the Hermit. Silence does not arise merely as the absence of sound, but as the absence of interference. It is in this space that intuition, muffled for years by constant stimulation, returns with strength. In 2026, many people are surprised to realize that the more they withdraw from external noise, the clearer certain internal answers become. Answers that once felt confusing or inaccessible. Intuition does not speak loudly. It does not compete with notifications, others' opinions, or social expectations. It manifests subtly, almost imperceptibly, through sensations, premonitions, and silent certainties. The problem is that in a hyper-connected world, few people create enough space to hear it. The Year of the Hermit corrects this almost inevitably. It reduces external stimuli so the internal channel can function again. That is why many people report sudden insights during moments of solitude, walking alone, quiet nights, periods away from social media. This is not coincidence. It is consequence. There is a fundamental difference between thinking and intuiting. Thinking involves analysis, comparison, logic, and often fear. Intuiting involves immediate recognition, a sense of "this makes sense" that does not depend on external justification. In 2026, isolation favors precisely this transition, moving away from excessive thinking and returning to direct perception. The hermit symbolizes this passage. He does not seek answers outside, he observes within. And by doing so, he develops a kind of clarity that cannot be taught, only lived. Silence also exposes internal noise that was previously masked. Old beliefs, unresolved fears, and deep insecurities emerge when the external world quiets down. For many, this is the most uncomfortable moment of the process, because listening to intuition requires courage. It does not always confirm what you want to hear, it reveals what you need to see. Relationships that no longer make sense, misaligned career paths, choices made out of fear rather than truth. Silence brings all of this to the surface. But along with discomfort, it brings direction. Another important aspect is that the awakening of intuition does not happen instantly. It is gradual. At first, the person feels only restlessness. Something is off. Then comes greater clarity about what must be left behind. Finally, a sense of internal alignment begins to emerge, even without complete answers. The hermit does not provide detailed maps. He offers a lantern. It illuminates only the next step. In 2026, trusting this small beam of light becomes essential because trying to see the entire path generates anxiety. Silence also redefines priorities. When you step away from noise, you realize that many urgencies were not real. They were simply external pressures disguised as necessity. Intuition helps distinguish what is essential from what is accessory. This is reflected in simpler but more coherent decisions, saying no with less guilt, choosing with more awareness, respecting boundaries without needing to explain. This is one of the great gains of the Year of the Hermit: internal autonomy. The person becomes less dependent on external validation because they begin to trust their own inner sense of direction. There is also an almost spiritual aspect to this process. Many ancient traditions associate silence with wisdom. Prophets, monks, philosophers, and seekers have always withdrawn from social life at certain moments to listen to something deeper. 2026 revives this archetype on a collective scale, not as a specific religious practice, but as a basic human need to reconnect with one's own essence. Intuition is not a mystical gift reserved for a few. It is a natural function of consciousness when it is not constantly interrupted. As intuition awakens, something interesting happens. Tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations that were once tolerable begin to feel more uncomfortable. This is not regression, it is refinement. When you begin to truly listen to yourself, it becomes impossible to ignore what does not make sense. And this explains why, during the year of the Hermit, so many people feel the urge to change, even without having all the answers. They may not know exactly where they are going, but they know clearly where they no longer want to be. Silence, therefore, is not an end in itself. It is a means, a portal. It creates the necessary space for intuition to reclaim its natural role as an inner guide. And although this process may bring moments of loneliness, it also brings a deep sense of truth. The person begins to recognize themselves again. They begin to feel that they are finally living in greater coherence with who they truly are. This inner recognition is worth more than any external approval. This chapter resolves one of the greatest dilemmas of those moving through 2026, the feeling of being lost. In reality, what is happening is not a loss of direction, but a change of compass. The old one, based on external expectations, stops working. The new one, based on intuition, begins to be calibrated. And this is only possible in silence. The Hermit teaches that those who learn to walk by listening to their own intuition are never truly lost. They are simply in a process of realignment. Every true ending requires renunciation. And this is one of the most difficult parts of the year of the Hermit. 2026 does not ask only for silence and introspection, it demands conscious detachment. When intuition begins to awaken, it not only reveals new paths, but clearly exposes what can no longer be carried forward. People, habits, mental patterns, and even old versions of who you believed yourself to be begin to lose support. This process does not happen abruptly for everyone, but it is inevitable. Year 9 does not negotiate with what is expired. It closes it. One of the first things 2026 often asks you to leave behind is the constant need for external validation. For a long time, many people made decisions based on approval, being accepted, recognized, praised. This shaped professional choices, relationships, and even lifestyles. The problem is that validation never satisfies. It creates dependency. The Hermit appears to cut this bond, showing that no external approval can replace internal alignment. When you begin to listen to yourself, you realize how much you shaped yourself to fit expectations that were never truly yours. Another important point is letting go of relationships that have already completed their cycle. This does not mean that all relationships end, but many change form. Some simply drift away. In 2026, this happens naturally, although it may generate sadness at first. The Hermit understands that not everyone walks at the same pace of awareness. Forcing permanence creates wear. In this case, distance is not rejection. It is respect for one's own process. When intuition strengthens, it clearly shows where there is real exchange and where there is only habit. There is also the abandonment of internal narratives that no longer make sense. Stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you can or cannot do, what you deserve. Many of these narratives were built in earlier phases of life, under different circumstances. In 2026, they begin to collapse. Silence reveals inconsistencies between how you live and how you feel. Maintaining these stories begins to create discomfort. The Hermit invites you to rewrite your identity, not from the past, but from present truth. Another central element that 2026 asks you to leave behind is excess commitments, information, stimulation, and expectations. The year of the Hermit values the essential. Everything that is superfluous begins to feel heavy. Many people feel the urge to simplify life. Fewer contacts, less consumption, less noise. This is not regression, it is refinement. When intuition awakens, it naturally seeks lightness. What does not contribute to growth is seen as a burden. This process of detachment often generates resistance. Fear of emptiness arises strongly. What if I end up too alone? What if I regret it? What if I'm wrong? These questions are natural, but they reveal attachment to the familiar, even when the familiar no longer nourishes. The Hermit teaches that emptiness is not absence, it is space. Space for something new to emerge. But nothing new arises on ground cluttered with emotional and mental debris. 2026 cleans in order to prepare. Another aspect many need to leave behind is haste. Anxiety for quick results, immediate answers, and absolute certainty does not align with year 9. The Hermit walks slowly but steadily. He understands that maturation takes time. In 2026, trying to accelerate inner processes creates frustration. The invitation is to slow down, observe, and integrate. This slower rhythm frightens those accustomed to measuring value by productivity, but it brings a quality of presence that was lost. What makes this chapter so important is the shift in perspective it creates. Letting go stops being seen as loss and begins to be understood as liberation. Everything that leaves opens space. Every ending reduces weight. Every detachment strengthens internal autonomy. When you understand this, fear diminishes. The year of the Hermit does not take away out of cruelty. It removes what blocks advancement. And although the process may hurt, it also relieves. 2026 asks for the courage to look at your life with radical honesty and ask, does this still make sense to me? And if the answer is no, to accept the ending without excessive dramatization. The Hermit does not cling to what has passed. He honors the lesson and moves on. This posture is essential to move through the end of a cycle with maturity. The more you resist, the harder it becomes. The more you accept, the lighter it feels. This chapter resolves another major problem faced by those moving through this period: fear of loss. When you understand that what is being left behind no longer supported your evolution, fear transforms into gratitude. Gratitude for what was lived and clarity to move forward. And it is precisely this clarity that prepares the ground for the final chapter, where the focus shifts from what is ending to how to move through this year with consciousness and purpose. After understanding why isolation arises, distinguishing internal recalibration from depression, recognizing silence as a portal to intuition, and accepting what needs to be left behind, the most important question emerges. How do you move through the year of the Hermit without losing yourself within it? Because there is a profound difference between withdrawing with awareness and isolating without direction. The Hermit does not step away to hide from life. He steps away to align with it. And 2026 asks exactly that. An intelligent, intentional, and temporary withdrawal that prepares you for a new cycle with greater lucidity. The first step to moving through this year with purpose is to stop fighting the process. The more you try to return to your old rhythm, the more exhausted you feel. Year 9 does not respond well to resistance. It works best with cooperation. Cooperating means accepting that your rhythm has changed, your needs have changed, and your priorities are being reorganized. This is not about abandoning responsibilities, but about adjusting expectations, especially those you impose on yourself. Respecting your own time stops being a luxury and becomes a necessity. The second fundamental point is creating real spaces of silence. Not only external silence, but internal silence. Reducing stimuli, limiting excessive information consumption, and being more selective about what you absorb. In 2026, too much information confuses more than it clarifies. Intuition needs space to manifest, and this only happens when the mind is not constantly reacting. Moments of conscious solitude, walks without distractions, pauses without guilt, All of these become tools for alignment. The hermit does not live disconnected from the world, but deeply connected to himself. Another essential aspect is learning to trust small signals. The year of the hermit does not deliver grand answers all at once. It works through subtle adjustments, a discomfort here, an insight there, an inexplicable urge to change something simple. Ignoring these signals creates confusion. Honoring them generates progressive clarity. Consciousness expands step by step. Trying to see everything at once creates anxiety. The hermit teaches that walking with a lantern is safer than running in the dark. It is also important to accept that not everyone will understand your process. In 2026, many people feel misunderstood, judged, or pressured to go back to being who they were before. This is one of the tests of the year of the hermit, sustaining your inner movement without needing to constantly explain yourself. This does not mean emotional withdrawal, but clear boundaries. Those who need constant justification have not yet fully trusted their own intuition, and trusting yourself is one of the greatest achievements of this cycle. Moving through this year with purpose also involves redefining what success means. In a world that values visibility, speed, and constant expansion, the hermit redefines success as internal coherence, being at peace with your choices, sleeping without the feeling of betraying yourself, sensing that each step, even a small one, makes sense. In 2026, less is more. Less noise, less haste, less forced adaptation, more truth, more presence, more alignment. Another crucial point is not romanticizing isolation, but also not demonizing it. The hermit knows when it is time to withdraw and when it is time to return. The purpose of this year is not to live permanently apart, but to use withdrawal as a tool for clarity. At some point, the call will be to return to the world, but in a different way, with more conscious relationships, more aligned choices, and a less fragmented identity. Isolation is the bridge, not the final destination. As 2026 progresses, those who move through this process with awareness begin to feel something different, an internal stability that depends less on external circumstances. Criticism weighs less, comparisons lose power, decisions become simpler. This happens not because life becomes perfect, but because the person begins to truly listen to themselves. And those who learn to listen to their own intuition do not get lost easily, even in times of uncertainty. The greatest gift of the year of the hermit is this: restoring people's authority over their own lives, not authority based on control, but on coherence. You begin to know when to move forward, when to retreat, when to end, and when to wait. This wisdom is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and deeply liberating. 2026 is not a year of ready-made answers, but of internal alignment. And those who align themselves move through any cycle with greater ease. If this content resonated with you, if this call to silence is also echoing within you, subscribe to the channel now and share this video with someone you sense is going through the same moment of withdrawal and inner confusion. Here we will continue to deepen these themes to help you move through this period with more clarity, awareness, and purpose, without fear and without guilt.